morning everyone, we're going to be working on this beautiful watercolour project. You're going to need 300 GSM, A4 paper, HB pencil. If you've done the preliminary drawing, brilliant. As you can see, I have already done that and taped it down to my desk. If not, we'll work through it in class, so don't worry about it. It is important that the drawing is accurate and linear and that you have removed any lines you do not wish to come through future coloured layers. Use a putty rubber if at all possible, as it's a little bit more delicate on the paper fibres and less likely to cause damage. To the left of me you can see that I have a watercolour palette set. It's a standard Winsor & Newton that I've added a few more blues and purples to, but as you know, images can print out from different printers, slightly different colours, so just go with the colours that you can see when you're working on this project. Don't worry too much about what I'm mixing. I also have a piece of kitchen roll which becomes really important in this project, and I will be using masking fluid. If you have some gum arabic, that will be a bonus. With the masking fluid, just before I forget, you're going to need some washing up liquid to protect your brushes. I would recommend having a few different brushes, some finer ones and some larger ones for the initial washes of the background. Let's get going, shall we? Right, so take out your masking fluid bottle and unscrew the lid. Make sure that you've given it a decent shake, and if it's a little bit old or been in the cupboard for a while, run a tester on a spare piece of paper. Pour it out onto your palette. You won't need much, a little bit goes a long way. As you can see, mine slopes down because the desk is at an angle. If you can do this on a flat desk, it's a lot easier. Right, once you've done that, the main problem you get with the masking fluid is that it'll wreck any brush that you use to apply it to the paper. So the standard little trick to go to is using some washing up liquid. Now make sure obviously before you do this that your pencil drawing is nice and clean, you don't have any bits of dust or grime on it and any lines where you don't want them. Then once you're happy, take your washing up liquid, get your brush and just brush it in. Now take off the excess around the edge of the container, otherwise you'll find that your masking fluid will end up going the same colour as the washing up liquid, in this case green. Once you've got those hairs covered thoroughly, then you just get your brush, dip it into your masking fluid and start applying it onto your drawing where you wish to protect it from the background layers that we're going to start applying. Use a really nice thick coatage if you can. Sometimes it's easier to just go over with one coat and then once it's dry, which it'll do in a few minutes, go back over the odd bit here and there where you can see the paper poking through as the layer wasn't thoroughly laid down enough. Take your time, be accurate, and once you have put it all down, just look over and check you haven't missed anywhere, because it's a real pain if you have. It'll need about 5 to 10 minutes to dry. It depends on the environmental conditions that you're working in. It's better to always give it a little bit more than you think it's going to need, as you're going to be going over with a lot of colour, and if you don't and it's wet, it'll start peeling off early, wrecking the preliminary drawing that's taking you ages to do. So it's really not worth rushing. Right, I've gone over it the second time now and just cleaned out my brush, run it under some water and all the masking fluid and washing up liquid will come off. Make sure that your water is clean, that you're ready to do the painting with. If you have any washing up liquid in it, you will end up with serious problems. Okay, we're going to end up doing some background washes. I've got my Dayla large wash brush, but you can use any brush you want. You want a soft hair. I also have a palette, well, a container to put some water in because I need to just get the hair on the end of the brush nice and wet and even for this to work. Initially, you need to look at any colours that you want for this wash and preliminarily make them up on your palette to check you're happy with them. So if you look at the image, you will find from the bottom you've got some yellow, and I'm using a lemon yellow. I'm going to then take that up into a green, and I use a Viridian green. If I manage to get all this yellow sorted out in time, as you can see. It's wise to have too much yellow because it's a light colour, you'll get through it quite quickly. Make sure you also clean your brush in between colour mixes. Once I've got that yellow and I'm taking it up into my green, if you look at the image, you'll see that that will then go up into a dark lilac-y blue. So I end up using a little bit of ultramarine, which I'll mix with crimson to get that stronger purple for the upper areas of the reference image. I'm going to work from bottom to top, and that'll give me a little bit of time to play around with. So let's grab those colours. As you can see, I'm just putting these out quickly on my palette. If you are unsure, have a spare piece of paper, and you can always just do a blob on there and check that you are in the right area for your colour mixing. Reference image observations. Right, so let's just come in, get that crimson mixed up, get a decent quantity on my palette, and then I'm ready to rock and roll and to get some colours laying down. Now my board is at an angle. This means that our colours will bleed down from the top through to the bottom layers. It works rather well in this type of picture. I would recommend you having a decent tilt on it. That doesn't mean a 90-degree angle tilt, more like a 45-degree to your board. Also, you'll find that you've got to get the right amount of clean water for this wash in the background. I apply a little bit too much in this video, therefore I would recommend that you watch how much you apply. Get the large brush, dip it in so that just the end of the hair is in the water, and then start wiping it across your paper. Now you can tell if you've got too much because first of all the paper will slightly bubble up off the desk, but secondly it'll look really shiny. You want it so it's just got a soft sheen off the top of your paper. If it's too shiny, it means there's a lot of water. This will dilute the pigment quality down, which isn't exactly great. The background is fairly strong in this image, and it will make it much more difficult to control any bleeds. You want to have control, but you also want it to soften out and bleed delicately. So timing is essential. Right, so here we go. I'm just going to start grabbing my colours, working light to dark, and making sure that I've got them working in the right place on the artwork. So I'm taking a little bit of the yellow, and I'm just putting that down where I can see it, usually in that bottom right hand corner. There's a little bit on the left. I'm thinking that obviously the yellow is going to be mixing in with some blue at a later stage and create greens. So therefore you can go a little bit more over the top with the yellow than you initially expect you're going to need. Once I've got the yellow down, I'm then going to work in that green. So I'm taking some of the green, adding it to the yellow that's nice and wet on my palette, and blobbing that in. The surface is wet, so everything's bleeding, but it's bleeding in quite a slow, gentle way, which means I can stop it from overworking and obliterating all the yellow that I actually want to keep. Once I've got that in, I'm then going to move up and use a little bit more of a stronger blue to mix a little bit more of a darker green in there. Now I want this to work so that it's got a bit more of a bleed. The paper's drying out, it's a warm room, so I've taken a spray bottle and just sprayed it occasionally to revitalise the wet wash that initially I need to get the colours to bleed into one another and make it quite fantasy based as a background goes. Now I'm picking up some blue. It's an ultramarine blue mixed in with the green. It'll go a lot darker than the green on its own right. Stir in a little bit of the blue with the crimson red, and you can start building up a lilac. Again, if you feel that it's drying out and the colour isn't bleeding down into the other shades so that you get that gentle transition from one colour to another, use a spray bottle as you need it. You use a brush just to pad it in, and because you've got all that masking fluid on top of your Bluebells, that means you can paint over the top of them and not worry, because you're going to be able to take that off, paint in the fine detail, and you can have all these beautiful bleeds in the background. It makes life a lot easier than going around everything. Right, take your tissue occasionally if you feel that you've overworked it and take off some excess. If you want to go a little bit darker, increase the blue content with the crimson and start building it up. At the top of this picture it's much darker than at the bottom, so I've just added a proportion of more blue to red in my lilac mix, as you can see here, and I'm dabbing it in quite quickly. You need to get this layout done and thoroughly allowed to dry. You could give it a blitz with a hairdryer if you want, just to speed up that process, or if you just let it dry in a warm room, it's quite fast with watercolours, you don't have to worry about it too much. Then you're going to find that you probably want to work into it again. Now with the watercolours, as long as you've allowed it to thoroughly dry, you can let it dry, put a clean wash over the top, just using the big brushes we did initially, and then start working more colours into that initial layer to boost the tonal quality. And it'll create a much more dynamic and interesting artwork, as you can see here, building up. Right, so now that I've allowed that layer to thoroughly dry, given it some decent amount of time, if you come in too early, you are going to have severe problems, because the next stage is you have to remove masking fluid. If you rub masking fluid off paper that is still damp, you will start ripping up all the fibres, which is a really bad idea. Now when you're doing masking fluid, don't pull towards you, rub it flat using the end of your finger. You can use a rubber and do it that way to create friction to lift it off, but be very gentle. If you start pulling it towards you or are too violent with it, the paper will break up. Take your time, do it carefully, and if you've done it correctly, it also shouldn't remove all your pencil guidelines. I've seen some people draw too lightly and have too much masking fluid down, and they end up losing their picture in the process, which is not the greatest idea. So you can see here I'm being very careful. I'm just using the end of my fingertip and gently rubbing and removing lumps of the masking fluid as it comes off. Gently dusting down any small fibres. Then towards the end, if I find that there's a little bit that I just can't get hold of, or if I feel that the paper is a little bit tacky in areas, I'll take a putty rubber and go over it with a putty rubber. That will ensure the removal of all the masking fluid without causing any damage to the surface of the fibres, which is the idea. Let's just get on and go then with the next stage of the painting, which is the really hard stage. This is the easy bit. Right, let's go. Okay, so to start off with, what you're looking at doing is mixing up some very pale pink. I'm using a magenta because I've got one, but a crimson red will do just a similar job. Ensure that it's a soft, light tone of pink, so lots of water, and then I'm just using a brush to put that down. I'm leaving any white of the paper for the highlight that I can see from the reference image, and putting only colour where I can see colour. I'm going to work down on that flower, then I'm going to grab a finer brush, as you can see here, and I'm going to increase the tone of my magenta by increasing the amount of pigment in the mix. Then I can work it up and build in a little bit of a darker tone while that area is wet. It will bleed smoothly and look very natural. You can then increase the tone, just paying attention to what you can see on the reference image. You can start mixing various colours, so add in a little bit of a darker purple and build up some shadow work as well. It'll all start coming together. However, it requires a lot of time and energy to do this. So do ensure that you have some quiet space to work on. It requires a lot of concentration, especially with something this fine and fiddly. It will be built up in multiple layers. Here I only do a few because I haven't got much time, but you have much more time. So you can see that I'm going to build up this, add in my darker tone, then I'll allow that area to dry while working on another area, and then I'll come back and build up a second tone and allow that to dry again, and then I'll come back and build up more detail with a third layer. Very fine work, but will provide you with excellent results, as you will be able to see in this video. There are some beautiful blues in this as well, so I use as many blues as I can get my hand on. I've got my intense blue, my cobalt blue, there's ultramarine, and then I work down through the purples. Mix it up. However, do keep note of which colours you're using for which flowers. You need to unify the whole picture, so don't go too mad and use so many colours that you can't remember how you initially did the mix for the area that you're working on. Have patience. Build up a layer of detail, then allow that to dry, then come back and build up a finer layer until you get better and better results. Use a very fine brush and you'll see beautiful results quite early on, usually in about the second layer. As I work down this picture, I'm generally in the demo just working on the top half because of time restrictions, but I come down, I use more blues and I get a little bit more loose and playful. It's up to you on how far you want to take that, but it is gorgeous to work. Enjoy it. At some point you might also find that you want to take the background a little bit darker than you initially think you wanted at that earlier stages. Don't be worried about using black. You can use black, but try never to use it pure. Always tint it. With this I use a purple or an ultramarine blue. You could also use a green in certain splodges. Since I'm just on that upper area, that's why I'm more restricted. Also, if you want to take it to the next level, you can use a little bit of gum arabic. So you take some of the gum arabic, pour out a little bit, and a little bit will go a long way. Remember, there's already gum arabic in watercolour paints. It's the main binder for the pigment. The more gum arabic you add, the longer that colour is going to stay wet on your palette, and also the consistency changes. It becomes quite thick. You'll find the results as it dries is a little bit more glossy. It depends on how much water you add to the mixture, because the more water, the more it softens out that effect of the gum arabic. But you can get much sharper, stronger, darker, highly saturated shades using the gum arabic. So I would recommend, if you haven't done it before, to have a go. You can see I'm doing this towards the end of the picture just to boost it up. See what you think.